Order. Joe Gideon to move the motion.
Thank you, Ms Vaz, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I want to open my remarks by reflecting on our connection to food. We all have cherished memories of key moments in our lives, sharing food with family, friends and neighbours. Birthdays, weddings and celebration dinners. Food is the thread that weaves together the fabric of our families and communities and societies. It is a universal language, spoken and understood by all, regardless of background and beliefs. It is a remedy for loneliness. In a world where technology often disconnects us, food has the power to bring us together. In the oldest of cities in our planet, for thousands of years, people have lived their lives in courtyards, in squares, on street corners, in cafes, tea houses and local shops. People have shopped, shared gossip and shared food. So knowing how we value food, it is an outrage that 4.6 million tonnes of edible food goes to waste every year. 4.6 million tonnes of food is enough to feed everyone in the country for almost 2 months. And that is just edible food waste, including food waste at the farm gate. We throw away over 11 million tonnes of food each year. That's valued at £20.8 billion. The overall land use associated with food wasted on UK farms alone amounts to almost the size of Wales.
Setting out the parameters of this debate very well. But that issue around the farm gate, a lot of that choice in terms of waste is driven by consumer choice and about products not looking acceptable to supermarkets or people on the shelf. Does she agree with me that we need to look at more innovative approaches such as Growers Garden in my constituency in Cooper that actually take the 20% of wonky vegetables and make them into crisps, which is a much healthier option than potatoes as well?
I thank you. She's absolutely right, and I will be coming on to wonky veg later in this debate. It's a particular passion of mine.
Thank the honourable member for giving way and congratulate her on securing the debate. Just on the issue of the scale of food waste, would you agree with me that some of the larger supermarkets are doing something to try and reduce the extent of food waste, but much more could be done in targeting particularly hard-to-reach communities and food banks where much more of the edible food waste, which she quite rightly outlines, could be put to much better use than is currently the case?
Thank you for the intervention. I absolutely agree, and I will also be coming on to that later in my speech. By eliminating avoidable food waste, the average four-person household could save around £1,000 each year. Worldwide, around a third of all food produced is either lost or wasted. This contributes to between 8 and 10% of total global greenhouse gas emissions. If food waste were a country, it would be the world's third largest emitter of greenhouse gases, behind the US and China, accounting for over 4 times the amount of carbon dioxide emissions produced by the world's aviation industry. Food waste is a social, financial and environmental issue. Currently, DEFRA is working closely with WRAP, the Waste and Resources Action Programme, and industry to reduce and prevent food waste, in order to meet the goals of the government's court-hold commitment, reducing food waste by 50% by 2030. Policy interventions are absolutely essential. We have reached the point where the early adopters have taken up the cause, and measures are required to encourage action from the late majority. At the supply end of the food chain, retailers and manufacturer practices can have a significant impact on household waste.
May I intervene? Of course. Thank you. Thank you for allowing this intervention. May I congratulate my honourable friend for calling this important debate, and would she join me in thanking volunteers like the wonderful Bethan Davies who work with Tesco, Holyhead and other local supermarkets to pick up surplus food, and community champions Roy Files, David Coulson and others at the Anglesey Food Bank who ensure that surplus food is not wasted but redistributed across Ynys Môn to those in need.
I absolutely congratulate the people that she's identified. And I think we all have people in all our constituencies and organisations who are doing fabulous work in this space. And I'd like to give a shout out to everybody on that basis. But going back to the retailers, the sort of things that could be helpful would be changes to packaging, date labelling and multi-buy offers. The biggest reason for household waste in 2022 was food not used on time as it was past the date on the label. So we must improve our date labelling and remove unnecessary use-by stickers on fresh produce. Selling more fruit and veg uncut and free from packaging prolongs shelf life too and enable customers to buy only what they need with the additional benefit of reducing packaging waste. Guardians of Grub is WRAP's food waste reduction campaign to tackle the £3 billion of food thrown away at hospitality and food service outlets. It explains that on average, 18% of the food purchased by UK hospitality and food service sector is being thrown away. Indeed, I'm often concerned about the levels of food waste here in the House at catered events. Quantifying the costs of food waste on the environment is particularly challenging, as the economic costs of climate change itself is highly contested. But it is clear that when left to decompose in landfill, food waste releases methane into the atmosphere, a potent greenhouse gas which drives climate change. Greenhouse gas emissions could be reduced by an estimated 1.25 million tonnes per year if all local authorities collected household food waste separately to send to an anaerobic digester. Despite this, more than half of councils do not collect food waste. So I am grateful that the government has committed to proposals that councils must arrange a weekly collection of food waste. By introducing a separate collection, this redirects food waste away from landfill and towards recycling and reduction instead. The Net Zero strategy announced £295 million of capital funding was being brought forward to allow local authorities to prepare to implement this new weekly separate food waste collection from all households. Can the Minister clarify how councils will be expected to finance this new waste stream? Food waste occurs throughout the whole food supply chain, and although it is a significant problem at the post-retail end of the chain, it is documented that there is a large degree of wastage at the start of the chain, at the farm gate. A single-year study by WRAP revealed that for just two important crops, strawberries and lettuces, £30 million worth of food ended up as waste. That's 9% of strawberry production and 19% of lettuces grown. And I think we all have heard the problem with excessive rain this year, which means that the crops are going to be really struggling. 48% of all food loss which occurs is pre-harvest through food left in fields, driven by standards and specification decisions beyond the control of farmers, such as the wonky veg we heard earlier, and an inflexible, broken food system, which I'm determined we should do more to tackle. We need to fill this food waste policy gap by focusing on on-farm food waste. Farmers currently lack incentives to redistribute this food, and instead it is left to rot or sent to landfill or anaerobic digestion. This is very topical. As I say, we had climate challenges that mean that farmers have had to make very difficult decisions recently. The government subsidy regime gives out £750 million each year to the anaerobic digestion industry, but 64,500 tonnes of food processed by anaerobic digestion consists of perfectly good surplus food. Many categorise food waste as a hierarchy. We should be aiming to keep as much food as possible at the top of this hierarchy, preferably being distributed to humans and therefore preventing it from being waste. Redistribution is the next most preferable option, followed by being sent to animal feed. Recycling food as anaerobic digestion or compost should only be done when the food is unsuitable for consumption. A recent survey conducted by Farmers Weekly shows that if costs weren't a factor, A majority of farmers would like to see surplus food getting redistributed to charities. At its heart, yeah.
I thank the Honourable Member for taking my intervention. Does she agree with me that at the moment supermarkets will leave food till the very last minute rather than distributing it for human consumption because they're incentivised to give it to animal feed? And if we could turn that around and incentivise them instead, like they do in France, to give it for human consumption or make it compulsory, we would be in a far better place than we are now, and it would solve some of the problems that she's alluded to.
She makes a very good point, and this is exactly the problem I think we need to address. At its heart, this is a simple logistics problem. How can we ensure that as much food as possible reaches the table? And when food that is fit to eat cannot be sold, how can we get it to people who need to make the most use of it? Can I ask the Minister whether he's looked at using the Environmental Land Management Scheme to rebalance the incentive for farmers to redistribute their edible food waste to sources where it will be eaten rather than sent to anaerobic digestion? Specifications can be both beneficial and problematic. UK growers are proud of the high quality food they produce, but stringent quality parameters have embedded a buying culture in consumers that expect cosmetically perfect looking produce. Many retailers have launched wonky veg lines to tackle food waste issues. However, these still not have been as popular with consumers because consumers are kind of trained to think that if it doesn't look perfect, then it's in some way inferior. So there's a higher in-store wastage on the wonky lines, if you like. Growers don't aim to grow wonky veg. Commercially, it costs the same, but it doesn't yield the same financial returns as their core volume crops. Retailers need to adopt greater flexibility in specifications to utilise the whole crop. And as consumers, we must welcome produce that comes in all shapes and sizes. In 2022, the government consulted on plans to require larger food businesses to report their levels of food waste, which resulted in a voluntary approach being adopted. Following feedback from stakeholders, this decision is currently being revisited. I welcome this and support a regulatory approach to food waste reporting for large food businesses. Can the Minister update what progress there is on this and advise when we can expect to hear the government's decision? The longer this takes, the more food is being wasted. Wasted food is a waste of land used to grow that could be better used to reach other societal objectives, such as nature recovery. The first step for food chain operators to take meaningful food waste reduction action is to actually measure current levels of food waste and publicly report them so they can act to eliminate waste. What isn't measured can't be reduced, so this is a vital first step. Evidence shows that 99% of companies who invested in food waste reduction had a positive return on their investment, and that of half the companies, a £1 investment by businesses in action to reduce food waste yields a £14 return. Large businesses would only have to prevent 0.25% of the food waste they create each year to offset any costs of measurement. This shows reporting can support wider measures from the government to reduce inflation and the cost of living. Any enhanced voluntary or mandatory reporting regime should emphasise that products are good to eat, that products that are good to eat don't end up as waste. Company Shop Group, for example, redistributes food that is good to eat or use and within date, but has been deemed surplus for minor issues such as labelling or packaging errors. And I couldn't speak on this topic without raising the excellent work of FareShare, the UK's largest food redistribution charity, taking edible surplus food from more than 500 businesses and redistributing it to people in need through a UK-wide network of almost 11,000 frontline charities. One of the 4 charities you FareShare work with say that they would not be able to keep up with demand to support the people they use, who use their services, were it not for this supply. Often it is local groups that do fantastic work in this space. So as always, I am delighted to highlight local efforts to combat food waste too. Our local food banks and community-based kitchens which are often based in faith settings, support the most in need. And I'm always humbled when visiting volunteer-run local organisations, which, sadly, there are too many to name individually here, to witness how those who have little help those who have less. I recognise and hugely value the work that charities do in the space of food redistribution. We now need to widen the discussion to cover the whole redistribution sector, to include opportunities for social enterprises and commercial redistributors. These businesses have a huge impact on both helping tackle food insecurity in local communities, but also a company mission of reducing food waste. And technology will play an ever-growing role in combating surplus food going to waste from local businesses. In my constituency, we have saved over 56,000 meals from the bin using the Too Good To Go app. This is equivalent of 1.5 years' worth of hot showers or 24.8 million smartphone charges. I asked the Minister to consider how this might tie in with introducing more flexibility into the apprenticeship levy, helping to fill skills gaps in the food redistribution sector and wider food chain, creating more employment opportunities in this growing sector. Indeed, there are excellent business and social enterprise models out there, funded by surplus food in an entirely self-sustaining way, with a social mission to addressing pathways out of food insecurity, whilst also preventing food from being wasted. In conclusion, the National Food Strategy Independent Review highlighted the need to rethink our approach to food production, consumption and distribution. Vast potential remains for surplus distribution. By raising awareness of the need to tackle food waste and creating a policy space that empowers businesses, we are encouraging innovative and supportive investment. So as we celebrate the joys and connections food fosters, let us also pledge to combat food waste and extend the spirit of sharing surplus with those in need in every community.
Thank you. I'm aiming to take the SNP spokesperson to wind up at about 10:28, so members will know to stick to, say, maybe 4 to 5 minutes, and everyone will get in. The question is that this House has considered food waste and food distribution. Anne McLaughlin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was thinking, please don't take me because I've got 8 minutes, but there you go. You're not giving me time to cut it down. I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for Stoke-on-Trent Central for bringing this here today. It's a really important debate, and we always say that, but this is crucial. For most people, the past 2 years have been utterly dominated by the cost of living crisis, by a fall in their living standards and a struggle from one payday to the next. The idea that there would be food waste as people struggle to feed their families seems perverse, but here we are. I'd like to declare an interest, Chair, other than the obvious interest of my constituents' right to nutritious food. I'm a trustee, I'm proud to be a trustee of the Scottish Pantry Network, which started with one pantry in my constituency a few years ago and now has 23 member pantries across Scotland. I'll say more about this later, but our passion is alleviating food poverty and reducing food waste. We do that day to day in each of these pantries, and we campaign more broadly for changes that, if we get our way, would make our pantries unnecessary. I'm sorry to say they're not the only organisation in my constituency to have to feed my constituents. Glasgow North Food Initiative, Lamb Hill Stables, Black Hill Growing, Spirit of Springburn are just a few of the many, and I pay tribute to their incredible work. The UK, of course, is not alone in dealing with rampant inflation and an increasing number of citizens not only feeling the pinch but being thrust into severe poverty. It's not alone in having far too much wastage in a supply chain that is predicated on food being plentiful and cheap. Where it does differ from other G7 nations like France and the US is that it hasn't legislated to address this. And the bulk of this work is being carried out by charities and community groups, so it's essential that there's a legislative and economic framework in place to support the businesses, as we've heard, supermarkets, who already do contribute, and to force those who are not yet engaging to do so. And I guess that's probably where we're going to disagree. I think they should be forced into it. And as has been mentioned, FareShare is one of those charities at the coalface. In order to cut down time, I won't say the wonderful things I was going to say about them because the Honourable Member's already done it. So my organisation, the Scottish Pantry Network, believes dignity for people accessing our services is essential. We don't give away food, and we don't require you to be living in poverty to access it. We also ensure the food we sell includes fresh fruit, vegetables, meat and fish. So we sell the food. It works out at roughly £15 worth of food for £3 or £4. We sell it because it gives people some agency. It makes them customers, and it means that they are not asking for a handout. So nobody knows when you enter one of our pantries if your motivation is saving the environment or alleviating your own poverty. And many of our shops look exactly like any other shop on the high street. In fact, the Courtyard Pantry in Hamilton Hill in my constituency would not look out of place in a trendy West End setting, although I'm not entirely sure how they'll feel about me saying that. Diverting good food from landfill and onto people's plates makes sense on so many different levels, as we have already heard. So surely to goodness we can agree that we must do everything that is in our power here in this room to support that. So there's a few immediate steps that I think any government, incoming or outgoing, needs to take to address both food insecurity and waste. And the important one is, as I said earlier, to incentivise surplus food redistribution across the supply chain. As I said earlier, under the current legislation, supermarkets are incentivised to pass food to animal feed, even when it's still fit for human consumption. They know that they can still sell this food, so they hang on as long as possible. And by the time they give up and decide to get rid of it, it's no longer usable. Or it maybe has around 3 hours left before it becomes unsafe for human consumption. But that's all right, because these supermarkets are then given a subsidy for the food to be given for animal feed at this point. And I'd like to see that changed. And in France, indeed, the practice has been outlawed. Supermarkets are simply not allowed to throw away edible food. Incentivising giving food for human consumption is feasible, it's workable, and I would really be interested to hear what the Minister has to say about that. I'd also be interested to hear what the opposition spokesperson has to say in that, just in case. So I said earlier, no, I didn't say earlier, Fair Share supplies most of the food to our pantries, but they often struggle to keep up with demand. So right now, I think Fair Share accesses around 4% of surplus food in the UK. Other businesses, like discount stores, they buy up the surplus food. But if Fair Share could access its fair share, organisations like mine could feed more people. And I want the Minister to know something. These organisations are not sitting back saying, give us more. As we've already heard, they're using innovative ways to get more for the people they support. They're growing food themselves. My organisation has a partnership with a farm now, and yet we are city-based. They are teaching people to cook so that nothing goes to waste. And certainly my organisation has wraparound services to support people into better paid employment and healthier lifestyles. So when I'm asking for government support for them to be able to access more food, it's to add to the many ways that they're doing that themselves. And I think that's worthy of not just kind words, which I'm sure will be forthcoming, but also action. Chair, I want to finish on something. We are debating food insecurity, and the focus today has so far been primarily on the UK. And you can see that I'm passionate about this. But I cannot speak about malnourishment and hungry people without mentioning Palestine, where thousands are starving and at least 27 children have just recently died from malnutrition. There is food to feed them, but to get the food, we need a ceasefire now. So I repeat my solidarity with the people of Palestine, my disgust at the perpetrators, and I reiterate the calls of so many of us for an immediate and unequivocal ceasefire.
Elaine Saxby.
It's a pleasure to serve under your chair, and can I thank and congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Stoke-on-Trent Central, for securing today's important debate. As she mentioned, 4.6 million tonnes of edible food are wasted in UK households annually. Around a quarter of this food waste is because too much food has been prepared, cooked or served. I've been a big supporter of Fair Share and their work, which in 2023 delivered 33,500 meals via 6 local community groups back home in North Devon and over 132 million meals nationwide. Fair Share is the UK's largest food redistribution charity. It takes surplus food from the food industry that would otherwise go to waste and gets it to a network of 8,500 charities across the UK. However, budget constraints meant that Fair Share had to turn down up to 2 million meals worth of good-to-eat surplus food last year. I wrote to the Chancellor last November to support the food redistribution sector because I felt that it is important that the government continue to support Fair Share's invaluable work for our communities and reconsiders the ring-fencing of funding for the food redistribution sector. And I'm glad that after FareShare's continuous campaigning, the government has recently announced a new £15 million fund to tackle surplus food at farm level. This fund will enable farmers to redistribute surplus food that cannot be used commercially. So being a very rural MP myself, we have perhaps occasionally different surplus food products in my constituency, and I met with FareShare very early on in my time in this place, where I was particularly interested to discuss with them their work with the Country Food Trust, who have championed dishes such as pheasant curry and venison bolognese as very high protein meat sources. So I also wanted to highlight today the work that the government has done to combat food waste. There has been £2.6 million of government investment and the support of the Courtauld 2030 commitment, which works for a more sustainable supply chain, tackling food waste, reducing greenhouse gas emissions and water use. Commitments also include a target to halve food waste by 2030. In 2022, the government consulted on options to improve food waste reporting by large food businesses in England. Over 3,800 responses were received, and hopefully DEFRA will be considering whether mandatory food waste reporting should be introduced in the future. Nearly £13 million has been awarded to over 250 redistribution organisations across the country since 2018 for the provision of warehousing, vehicles, fridges and freezers. Weekly collection of food waste will be introduced for most households across England by 2026, ending the threat of waste waiting weeks for collection and cutting food waste heading to a landfill. I find it quite bewildering when I am up here in London that I have to put my food waste in the bin with everything else, unlike when I'm back home in North Devon when we have a separate food caddy collection. So many thanks to North Devon Council for their work in ensuring this weekly collection does continue. So I very much hope that we will be able to really stop the move away from 3 and 4 bin collections that have been seen in some areas of the UK, because food waste, particularly in a hot summer, doesn't want to be sat on your doorstep for too long. When I supported FareShare's Food on Plates campaign back in 2021, I said wasting good food should never be cheaper than feeding people. So I asked the Minister to look again at some of FareShare's requests on how to incentivise businesses to redistribute more surplus food and consider long-term plans such as the National Food Strategy to recognise the bigger picture of how our food system is also linked to our environmental goals. I know many residents home in North Devon have raised concerns to me about the rise in food prices, which impacts us all. And as a result, many charities have reported financial difficulties. As the redistribution of food falls within a cross-departmental remit, I do hope the Minister will be able to share some insight into what is being done behind the scenes to support this crucial sector. And I just wanted to take this opportunity to put on the record my thanks to everyone back home in North Devon for their ongoing work in food distribution and working to reduce our food waste.
Sharon Hodgson.
Thank you very much, Ms Vaz. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship this morning. And I want to thank the MP for Stoke-on-Trent for securing this important debate also. Food redistribution services are fighting on the front line of the food waste and climate crisis and must be supported. Over a third of all food in the UK is wasted. That's an absolute shocking statistic when you think about it. This waste contributes up to 10% of all greenhouse gas emissions and costs the UK economy over £20 billion a year. This is more than the entire aviation sector. Whilst there is always lots of public debate about environmental impacts of aviation, maybe it's time we shed more light on how we support food redistribution schemes, which will be foundational if we are to have a more environmental sustainable future. And I have a wonderful example of success in the redistribution sector in my constituency called Company Shop, and we've heard a bit about them already this morning. Company Shop Group are a food redistribution service that has been able to transform unwanted products into usable, saleable goods for the benefit of my community and many others in their various locations across the country. They understand that the UK throws away at least 10 million tonnes of food every year, but incredibly 6 million tonnes of this waste is avoidable and actually has a retail value of over £17 billion. Now, that is where Company Shop Group is able to prevent wasted food and salvage value that would have otherwise literally gone in the bin by reselling this surplus food at a discounted price to their members. Their store in my constituency has saved my constituents nearly £7.5 million on their shopping bills, while saving 2,649 tonnes of food from being binned. These numbers are astonishing and represent 6.3 million meals that would have otherwise gone to landfill, where they would have fed no one and contributed to preventable environmental damage. As we can see, benefits from food redistribution services such as this are felt by more than just our planet. They are felt in our constituents' pockets too. As we've seen over the last few years, the cost of food can rise very quickly and fall very slowly, and contribute to growing levels of food insecurity and financial hardship for working people. Food redistribution schemes can be incredibly useful to prevent food waste and ensure that our food system is more affordable and sustainable. And whilst the sector has seen incredible success from various charities, there is also vital work delivered by social enterprises and commercial organisations such as Company Shop Group that we can celebrate. And as the chair of the all-party parliamentary group on school food, I hear from food procurement specialists, school food providers, schools and families alike of the dire consequences of food insecurity. Food insecurity is one of the major challenges policymakers currently face, and the most vulnerable in our society are those who suffer the most. We need to support charities, businesses and organisations to put food redistribution at the centre of their operations, so that we can save our constituents money and preserve the planet for future generations. That is why many of us here today will cautiously welcome DEFRA's recent announcement that it will reconsider its earlier decision to delay introducing mandatory food waste reporting for large food businesses until 2026. Due to overwhelming support for the policy from environmentalists, food and nutrition campaigners, food redistribution specialists, the public and businesses alike, the appetite for mandatory food waste reporting is at an all-time high. And mandatory food waste reporting is a relatively light touch and simple intervention which could be hugely cost-effective, incentivising large food businesses to cut down on their waste and incentivising redistribution by organisations such as Company Shop Group. The food redistribution system has the potential to be incredibly efficient so long as we achieve the joined-up policy making that stakeholders across the sector are calling for. Last month, over 30 companies within the food, retail and manufacturing sectors signed an open letter organised by the Food Redistribution Act, Too Good to Go. And if anybody hasn't used that app yet, I can highly recommend it, especially in London. You can get access to anything within a few metres of where you are in London, not so much in the northeast, although I do still manage to use it in the northeast. And this letter called on the government to introduce mandatory food waste reporting as soon as possible. By reporting on food wastage, we support redistribution schemes and tackle the crisis of food waste that was for too long a hidden evil in our food system. We need to put food redistribution at the centre of how we think about our food system, and we need the policies to make this happen. Repealing DEFRA's 2026 timeline and introducing the mandatory food waste reporting as soon as possible should be a good place to start. And I look forward to the Minister's response.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Pleasure to speak in this. First of all, can I thank the Honourable Lady for Stoke-on-Trent for leading today's debate. It is estimated in 2021 total food waste in the UK amounted to some 10.7 million tonnes. Most food waste comes from households, equates to some 60%, followed by farms 15%, manufacturing 13% and retail too. It is clear by these figures that more needs to be done as a collective to tackle our food waste statistics. So it's great to be here to discuss that. It's very clear, Madam Chair, when it comes to this isn't just something the Minister gives us the solutions for. It's something that we as elected representatives in the communities as well must work together on. I was shocked to read that the value of the edible parts of household household waste amounted to some 17 billion. It's equivalent of £250 per person per year, or £1,000 for a family of 4. In Northern Ireland in 2021, Mr Lyons at that time called for a crackdown on food waste, and it was estimated that Northern Ireland accounts for some 25% of the content of our non-cycling bins. So I want to give a couple of illustrations of what can be done by my community, by the major shopkeepers, by Asda, by Tesco. They give perishable goods at the end of the week and the end of the day, actually, excuse me, to the community groups, who in turn give them to needy families and to elderly people as well. So it's incredible what they do. The local warehouse, in our example, and I never knew this until I went to see them there just before Christmas, where Jude Bailey, she's a lady in charge, also does a great work. She collects chicken and ready-made meals that companies have for 24 hours. And at the end of 24 hours, they then give them to this local group, the warehouse group. They freeze it, and in turn, they make up meals. And I was really impressed by what they have. So they make a free meal for the communities every day, so that the food is not wasted. This is people voluntarily doing that, very similar to what the Honourable Lady who spoke for the Scots Nats earlier said. People are incredibly kind. Jude and her team of committed Christians, because they are, show their faith through what they do by helping others. Not only are we wasting food, but we waste a large amount of energy and associated carbon emissions from growing and transporting food too. We have, in Northern Ireland, we have successfully diverted some 1 million tonnes of biodegradable waste from landfill since 2015, but there is still an excessive amount of waste to be addressed. We are all guilty, Madam Chair, of throwing out too much food and not making use of what we have in our kitchens. But we don't realise to the full extent how much environmental damage this can cause. I'm going to give you a trip down memory lane, Madam Chair. In the 60s, whenever I was a child, nothing was lost in our house, and I mean nothing. We owned a shop. In the family home, we got what we didn't sell. That wasn't because it was bad. And by the way, I'm a pensioner now, so it hasn't affected me in any way. I've seen that I've held onto my health for a long number of years, so I've been an indication that the food was okay. I'll tell you this, the cheese, when it was going a bit blue, you know what we did? We cut it off and we ate it. And you know, something didn't do us any harm. And in this day and age where I've been, it probably wouldn't happen, but we did it. Everything was used, and whatever wasn't used, you know something, the Corey dog got it. Nothing was lost. When it comes to using everything in the house, my goodness me, I think we were the examples in the 60s as children with a family who were very, very capable. Absolutely.
He's making a very good point that I didn't actually make in my speech, but he's brought the figure to mind, and that is 70% of waste in this country is from households. We all think of the supermarkets and restaurants as being where the waste is all coming from. So he's made a very good point, and would he agree with me that we need to start in our own households, exactly as he's describing, if we want to solve food waste?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's the point I'm trying to make. And I said it in the Minister at the very beginning. Don't expect the Minister to give us all the answers. We have the answers ourselves individually, and our community has them as well. I'm thankful for a very frugal wife who is careful with our grocery and shopping list, but I also stand the pressure on young families and who are busier now than I can ever even imagine. Both parents working, coming home, carrying out homework, taking the kids to football, the boys' brigade, the girls' brigade, when do they make the meals, rinsing out the containers for the recycling bin, management. You may envisage making dinner 6 times that week and buying the groceries when the timings are changed for football, the school choir singing, or indeed they need to be dropped off. So it's hard for a family to make all those decisions. Whilst we have rightfully moved from girls-only home economic classes, and I'm impressed when I go to schools and I see young boys in the same class, equally numbered, doing the same work, learning how to cook. I have to say that before I was married, it was bacon buddies. It was toast onto the grill and bacon. I'll not tell you how often I used that, by the way, and how often it was cleaned. I think I survived it well as a single man, but when I got married, of course, life changed. I think the Lord it probably did, you know. It's clear from these figures that have been cited today that we need to take action. So I'm a great believer in education, changing not simply our generation, but creating a future generation equipped with tools to do better than we're currently doing. I finish with this last comment. Households on low budgets need help to know how best to use their food, and households on increased budgets need the same lessons, because this isn't a tale of income. This is a tale of mindset, as the Honourable Lady indicated in her intervention, and we all must change our mindset to be better stewards of our resources in food, money, and of course, Madam Chair, our time. Thank you.
We're a hop house.
Thank you, Ms. Vaz. It's a pleasure to serve with you in the chair, and I congratulate the Honourable Member for Stoke-on-Trent Central for bringing this very important debate to this chamber. The contribution food waste makes to the carbon emissions is well documented. Over 10 million tonnes of food are wasted every year in the UK alone, which produces 18 million tonnes of greenhouse gas emissions. And we heard it's methane, which is a most potent greenhouse gas. It degrades more quickly, but it is also one of the most powerful greenhouse gases. So let's not forget this. The Food Waste Index report indicates that 10% of global greenhouse gas emissions are due to food waste. This is 5 times more than the aviation sector. And it has been mentioned here before, we should not forget, we mentioned the aviation sector a lot, but food waste is one of the main contributors to global warming. Much is often made of commercial food waste, and it is this area which legislation is often targeted at. However, according to the ONS, more than half of food waste happens in the home, with the majority of food that is thrown away being considered edible. While businesses must bear an increased responsibility for reporting commercial food waste, households must also be incentivized to reduce their own, and we have heard a powerful comment around what people can actually do to change their mindsets about food and what is edible and what isn't. There is a lot that households can do to reduce waste by changing behavior. The Waste and Resources Action Programme suggests measures such as ensuring fresh food is refrigerated below 5 degrees Celsius and purchasing loose fruit and vegetable rather than packaged. More can also be done on date labels, as RAP suggests, on putting a label on uncut fresh product unless it can be shown that a best before date reduces overall food waste. We Liberal Democrats strongly believe that the UK must adopt circular economy techniques, cutting resource use, waste and pollution by maximising recovery, reuse, recycling and remanufacturing. We can do so much better on recycling. Too much organic waste is still landfilled or incinerated. Scotland will ban the landfilling of organic waste by 2025, but a similar ban in England will not come into effect until 2028. A 2025 ban would cut emissions by an extra 13% by 2030. Why is the government not bringing this date forward? There are many examples from the voluntary sector to distribute food which would otherwise go to waste. Organisations such as FairShare, which has been mentioned several times this morning, play a pivotal role in diverting surplus food from the food industry. And it redistributes it to a network of 8,500 charities across the nation. In my constituency of Bath last year, FairShare delivered the equivalent of over 230,000 meals through 27 local organisations. That is an enormous amount, and we must congratulate FairShare for its incredible work they are doing. However, it should not be up to voluntary organisations to plug the gaps that the government allows to proliferate. We must address the underlying causes of food poverty and overproduction. Businesses are not obliged to disclose their food waste data publicly. Will the government consider bringing in mandatory reporting of food waste for businesses? Mandatory reporting was included in the government's resources and waste strategy amongst other legislative changes, such as a mandatory food waste prevention target. The changes in the strategy have been broadly welcomed by many. Dozens of large supermarkets have called for voluntary reporting to become mandatory. However, we are yet to see the strategy be implemented. Can the government indicate when the strategy will be implemented? I'm worried about others wanting to speak, so I won't. Reducing food waste and improving its distribution is an opportunity to encourage sustainable community-driven initiatives which reduce food waste, miles and waste. Recent research has indicated that the UK could grow up to 40% of its own fruit and vegetable by using urban green spaces. Liberal Democrats want to restore market garden hinterlands around our towns and cities. This would reduce food miles, provide satisfying jobs, and reduce food waste and packaging. This would be a combination of SMEs and community-supported agriculture. In my constituency, projects like Crop Drop do incredible work to bridge the gap between locally grown and those in need. Since its inception, Crop Drop has been a beacon of sustainability, highlighting the importance of allotment access and minimizing locally grown food waste. In 2020 alone, its first year of operation, Crop Drop completed over 150 journeys, delivering an estimated 21,000 meals. This is a prime example of the circular economy that Liberal Democrats want to see implemented across the UK. Reducing the food miles from plant to plate reduces emission as well as wastage. However, we cannot leave filling the gaps up to the voluntary sector. The government needs to step up and act on this issue with a sense of urgency. Already inadequate action to address food waste has been delayed. Meanwhile, more food continues to go into landfill and emissions continue. We can do better.
Thank you. I want to thank the member for Stoke-on-Trent for putting forward this debate today, and also it's a pleasure to share under your chairmanship. In doing so, I want to maybe take two different lines on this, and one is the household, and many people have made reference to the amount of food waste that is generated within the home. And I maybe just want to give a small example of what has been happening. In my own constituency, many of the community groups have identified that homes are under tremendous pressure from not just the cost of living, but their budgets are being squeezed on every way, and have made efforts to actually bring together a number of people to educate those within the home that are cooking and providing and doing the shopping, how they can prepare meals, generate a shopping list, and unfortunately our supermarkets are laid out in a way which is not necessarily the way that you used to walk into a shop with a list of what you wanted and you got it from behind a counter. Now you walk around that shop and everything is put out to tempt you to actually say, well, I think I need this. I know whenever I go shopping, my wife always says it costs us twice as much as whenever she's doing it. Now, I'll explain to you, my eye is always bigger than my belly. And unfortunately, I decide that certain things are needed and they're not needed. And to be truthful with you, a number of the community groups in my area have been running these programs where they're bringing people in, learning them how to put together a menu for a week and learning how to shop for a week. You know, we've already heard how almost 70% of food waste is generated in the home, and how can we deal with that? We're producing almost 11 million tonnes of food waste in the United Kingdom. That is going to landfill, predominantly to landfill, and producing methane. And there are other ways to deal with that waste rather than to use it to landfill. We can actually recover energy from our food waste by using technology that is out there as well. But I just want to highlight, worldwide it contributes to 1.3 billion tonnes of food waste. Now, much of that is not necessarily down to, it's down to lifestyle and how we have learned to be a consumable society. And as a consequence, we are producing far more food than we could ever use usefully. Gone are the days, and my colleague, my good friend, made reference to the fact that whenever he was young, the shop, whatever was left, they decided, well, this is coming close to the end of it. Not sell-by date, you know, because sometimes the sell-by date doesn't mean the food can't be consumed. It's just, we'll use this. Food came more local. We are now a global market. Our food is coming from all over the world, and this is contributing to part of the problem because we've created different tastes within our society. You know, I want to eat certain foods that are not produced locally, and we used to eat berries that were only produced at certain times of the year. Now we want them all year, so therefore they have to be brought in. But we have generated a consumable society which is actually fuelled by what we have on our shelves. And I do think that it's important that we do put this in place. There was a bill passed, legislation went through Westminster called the Waste Reduction Bill legislation in 2015. I can say that certain parts of that have already been mentioned this morning. I want to say that there's parts where we should be encouraging, and I must say that the large retailers have taken the lead in many of this in many sectors relating to this area. We should support them totally, and on many occasions they're ahead of what we are attempting to do as legislators. There should be certain issues brought in relation to tax breaks that are offered for those who are efficient and do not produce much waste. And I think that has to be considered as an opportunity. But generally, I think we should be encouraging the housewife, and maybe that's the wrong term to use, those who are cooking within the home to actually be far more efficient about what they put on the table and what they do whenever they go out shopping. Ensure that we do not buy more than what we actually can consume. And therefore, that message will go back. And I want to thank those charities that have been so successful in putting forward the Fair Share scheme and the food reduction system, which is there now. Also, the Too Good to Go scheme is fantastic, and I must say I was unaware of it until recently, and I do think, and I want to thank the member for bringing this debate to the House today.
We've got two more speakers, and I'm taking wind-ups at 10:28, so I think it's roughly about 4 minutes each. Richard Ford.
Thank you, Ms Vaz, and it's a privilege to serve with you in the chair. I would like to cover briefly three subjects. Firstly, the benefits of redistribution. Secondly, to pay tribute to some brilliant community groups who I think we can probably all learn from. And thirdly, to talk a little bit about a specific proposal for the Minister today relating to the emissions trading scheme. So if you think about a few years ago, you could go to a takeaway baguette retailer and it would boast that if the sandwiches didn't sell within 3 hours, they would be destroyed. I'm so pleased that there has been a revolution in our thinking about food waste. In 2021, we've heard that over 10 million tonnes of food went to waste in the UK, so still a staggering amount, but at least people are now starting to think about how they can avoid food waste. Given that, £250 per person is wasted each year when food goes in the bin. That's an absolutely huge sum. To pay tribute to some fantastic community groups, the Food Save initiative in the part of East Devon that I represent is absolutely fantastic. This time last week, I was in the village of Beer, a former fishing village. There is such a strong sense of camaraderie that goes on with some of the food redistributing initiatives like Food Save. What I saw was the hall being laid out with so much excess food that had been sought from retailers and supermarkets, and then at 12:30 the doors opened and in flocked tens of people from the local area to take food with absolutely no stigma. And why should there be? They weren't just alleviating poverty. What they were doing is saving food and saving money and avoiding waste. So clearly there's a big distinction here between what food banks do with referrals and what redistribution organisations like Food Save do. I'd like to pay particular tribute to Mike McAlpine from Beer Food Save, but also to Jake Bonetta, who set up the initiative in Honiton. I also want to talk about my time spent at Rerouted Community Cafe in Tiverton, who operate on a pay-what-you-feel basis. I went there several Saturdays ago, and I cleared some plates, not only in the way that a waiter does, clearing up after people have eaten, but I also cleared some plates by eating the food that they put together from scraps and morsels, and I can tell you it was absolutely delicious. Lastly, to the very specific point, and a recommendation that I would like to make for the Minister. Given that we reckon 18 million tonnes of CO2 was released into the atmosphere in the UK in 2021 due to food waste. We've really got to think about how we can offset this. The Food Save initiative, Jake Burnetta and co have come up with a fantastic proposal that at the moment the UK-wide emissions trading scheme generates over £4.5 billion. That was the case a couple of years ago anyway. But the government is spending as little as 20% of that money received through the emissions trading scheme on cutting domestic emissions. What if the voluntary carbon market that is unregulated could be used for redistributing some of the funds to some of the community-based organisations that I've described? So I see that the Minister will sum up shortly, and I would encourage the Minister to consider that redistribution scheme operators, such as Food Save, are expressly eligible to sell their carbon offsetting through the scheme. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Vaz. It's an honour to serve under your chairmanship, and I thank the Honourable Member for Stoke-on-Trent Central for bringing forward this important debate. Now, the food system isn't working. People in this country struggle with food security and are living in food poverty. Much of our food waste ends up in landfill, thus contributing to greenhouse gas emissions. The Food Foundation have found that the poorest 20% in society would need to spend half their disposable income to be able to afford the NHS's recommended healthy diet. So food waste is a significant issue with vast environmental, social and economic implications. We need to redesign the food system to meet everyone's needs. Now, mandatory reporting of food waste for big businesses is key if we want to understand how much food is being wasted. The government have shown remarkable level of indecision over whether to move from voluntary to mandatory reporting, but I was pleased that the current DEFRA Secretary of State stated last year to reconsider the decision not to implement mandatory reporting, but I'm still concerned that this is after 6 years of delays. So with the benefits being so clear, I hope the Minister may take this opportunity today to confirm the timescale for the decision to be made. Now, there's a real lack of information on pre-farm gate food waste, but RAP estimate that there could be 1.6 to 3.5 million tonnes of food waste pre-farm gate per year. And I was out talking to a farmer near Castle Carey about this recently, and she told me how heartbreaking it is, and I, as a farmer's daughter, I also know that. But, you know, sadly, much of this pre-gate farm waste is driven by unfair supermarket buying practices in the just-in-time supply food model. If farmers fail to produce enough food for supermarkets, they can be hit with penalties, which can drive overproduction of food to ensure targets are met. Yet supermarkets can negotiate contracts that give them flexibility to cancel or reduce orders at the last minute, whereas farmers are more likely to be tied into contracts that leave them with surplus food they cannot sell elsewhere. We need to give the groceries code adjudicator more teeth to stop this practice and to ensure there is more fairness in the supply chain. Now, Riverford Organic Farms have spearheaded the Fairness in Farming campaign, and late last year, their survey of British fruit and veg farmers revealed that 49% fear they will go out of business within the year. And many cite supermarket behaviour as a major reason for this, and the relentless desire of supermarkets to sell pre-packaged food also drives pre-farm gate food waste. Perpetual bog-off, buy one, get one free deals, and fruit and veg sold in plastic packaging encourages consumers to buy more than they may use and forces farmers to discard produce that doesn't fit into the specifications.
Spokesperson Stephen Bonner.
Ms Fife, it's nice to see you in the chair this morning. My thanks also to the Honourable Member for Stoke-on-Trent Central for securing this important debate today on food waste and redistribution. As SNP spokesperson for the environment and food, I welcome the opportunity to address this issue. It is one that plagues our society. Wastage, the unconscionable amount of food waste that we allow to happen each and every year. And I'll also look to highlight some of the excellent work being undertaken in Scotland in relation to this subject, because it's not just a matter of leftovers on our plates, as important as that is. It's also about the obscene waste of perfectly good, nutritious food, while people in our communities, the length and breadth of these aisles and beyond, go hungry. Of course I will.
Thank my honourable friend for giving way. The Managing Director of Too Good To Go, which is an organisation that's been mentioned several times this morning, has said the UK government's refusal to introduce mandatory food waste reporting was a blow to the UK food waste reduction efforts. There's been a lot of criticism about the delays that have gone on constantly on this issue. The European Commission has proposed introducing legally binding targets to try to limit food waste across the UK, leaving the UK behind once again in progressive regulation. Is he as dismayed as I am at the government's intransigence on this vital issue?
I thank the honourable friend for her intervention. I think she makes excellent points. I think we're all frustrated, not just in this area with the government's intransigence, but right across the food, environment and rural affairs spectre. It really is disappointing, some of the matters. I know that she is so keen on these particular matters, and she's done some excellent work, so I commend her for that. The numbers at play, Ms Faza, in relation to food waste are stark. In Scotland alone, we waste a staggering 1 million tonnes of food and drink every single year. Shockingly, around 60% of this waste originates from within the household, with an additional 25% coming from food and drink manufacturing. That is enough food to feed countless hungry families, yet it ends up rotting in landfill, emitting harmful greenhouse gases and contributing to the very climate crisis that we are all so threatened by. And this isn't just about individual actions, important as those are. It's a systematic failure. It's about the failure of government to take decisive action, just like my honourable friend was saying, to address this issue, preferring instead to prioritise their own narrow political agendas over the well-being of our planet and of our people. But perhaps the most frustrating is the fact that so much of this waste is entirely avoidable. And we know that 70% of food waste is still edible. 70%. We know that preventing this waste in the first place is not only morally imperative, but also economically and environmentally sound as well. I will be happy to.
The Honourable for giving way. I recently visited Frome Community Fridge, the first of its kind in the country, and they told me that since they've established in 2016, they've been able to fill 8 Wembley stadiums worth of surplus food. So does he agree with me that these kind of innovative projects are really important to help us reduce food waste?
I thank her for her intervention, and she's actually right. It's a great analogy. Wembley Stadium is massive, and to think of that number stacked up, we can all visualise that right now. It is obscene, absolutely obscene. Research has shown us that by achieving a 58% capita in reduction in food waste by 2050, we could remove the equivalent of 5.6 million cars from UK roads, and that would of course significantly mitigate our carbon outputs. And let's not forget the impact on households struggling to make ends meet. So we've heard of so many groups and organisations, just like my honourable friend from Frome has mentioned, doing stellar work in relation to food insecurity across all of our constituencies. Coatbridge, Christon and Bellshill is no different in that regard, and our appreciation in SNP for all of these groups and organisations, I hope, is very clear. Over a third of Scots worry about their ability to afford food, especially in the face of a cost of living crisis and the disastrous effects of Brexit, which have only served to exacerbate this situation. And the National Farmers Union reported crops worth over £60 million were left to rot in fields due to Tory-induced labour shortages and indeed other factors, while supermarket shelves are bare, prices are rocketing, and people are being left devoid of the essentials that they so rely on. Fortunately for us in Scotland, there is hope on the horizon. The Scottish Government has taken bold steps to address food waste head-on. In 2018, they committed to reducing Scotland's food waste by 33%, and that set a precedent across the rest of Europe. Through regulations and partnerships with organisations like Zero Waste Scotland and Fair Share, that we've heard so much about their excellent work today, we've implemented measures to reduce waste at every single level, from production to distribution, all the way through to consumption. With improved monitoring and infrastructure programmes in place to enhance public engagement and communication, we are leaving no stone unturned in the fight to reduce food waste. The UK Government must now follow Scotland's lead and take decisive action on food waste. The Environmental Audit Committee's report on climate change and food security has called for that national strategy to tackle this issue, echoing much of what the Scottish Government has already implemented. So I hope the Minister will look kindly on that recommendation and let us all renew our commitment to reducing food waste and building a more sustainable future for the generations to come after us. Thank you.
Opposition spokesperson Daniel Zeitner.
Thank you, Ms Vaz. As always, a pleasure to serve with you in the chair. And it's been a busy few weeks for DEFRA since we were all last together. The Minister of State knighted, the Secretary of State overriding his civil servants. Anyone would think there's a major event coming up soon. But perhaps the Minister can pass our congratulations on to his colleague. It's very well deserved. And of course also congratulations to the Honourable Member for Stoke-on-Trent Central for securing today's debate. And I commend her not just for today's debate, but for all the work she's done as chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on the National Food Strategy. And she made an excellent introduction to the debate this morning. Now, nobody wants to see good food wasted, but the scale of food waste in the UK is shocking, as many of the contributions we've heard have outlined this morning. 3.3 million tonnes of UK food wasted on farms every year, 2.9 million tonnes of farm produce that could still be eaten going to landfill, incineration or waste treatment plants. UK on-farm food waste alone is estimated to use an area of agricultural land half the size of Wales. There have been lots of comparisons this morning. Land which could be used to help sustainably feed the UK and restore nature to address the biodiversity and climate crises. After leaving the farm gate, the UK food supply chain and households currently waste 9.5 million tonnes of food every year, 70% of which, as we've heard, could have been eaten. This annual waste has an approximate cost of £19 billion and causes emissions of 36 million tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent, a point I thought was very well made by my honourable friend from Washington and Sunderland West. It means over a quarter of all the food grown in the UK is never eaten, and this wasted harvest accounts for between 6 to 7% of total UK greenhouse gas emissions. And of course this at the same time as 2.1 million people in the UK live in a household which has used a food bank in the previous 12 months. And of course we also know, as again been referenced, that the high food inflation hits poorer families much more severely, forcing them into buying cheaper, less healthy food at best, or hunger at worst. And as the Food Foundation recently pointed out, if poorer families were buying the lowest priced fruit and veg available, it would cost between 34% and 52% of one person's weekly food budget to afford a week's worth of the 5 a day that's recommended. That's twice as much as the 17 to 26% for the wealthiest 10% of families. And despite those high prices, too many farmers and growers increasingly despair being able to make a living, particularly in the face of cheap, lower standard imports. And as we discussed in last month's food security debate, this is leaving the UK vulnerable to global supply shocks and disruptions. Now, Henry Dimbleby's National Food Strategy and others have pointed to some of the causes of food waste that runs throughout the supply chain. We've heard much about it this morning. It's familiar stuff. Vegetables grown for a market that's dried up, wonky carrots cast aside, wasted peelings, unappetising meat offcuts, over-ordered food which supermarkets or restaurants can't sell, food we bought but no longer fancy at home, food that rots because of a shortage of labour to harvest it, or while stuck in post-Brexit queues at the border. There are problems, it seems, at every stage through our system. But there are also, of course, opportunities. And as ever in this country, there are plenty of good initiatives. With the encouragement of RAP and the Food Waste Reduction Roadmap, almost a third of large UK food businesses are implementing Target Measure Act, representing almost 60% of the overall turnover for UK food manufacture, retail and hospitality and food service. And the redistribution of food by groups and businesses that we've heard much about this morning, such as Fair Share and Too Good To Go, helps feed hungry people through food banks and is of course praiseworthy. But frankly, we shouldn't kid ourselves. Voluntary waste reduction and surplus redistribution can at best only ever be short-term sticking plaster solutions to food waste, poverty and hunger. The food waste and surpluses created arise from market failures in the food supply chain. And not only can the government act to address these, it committed to a target in last year's Environmental Improvement Plan to reduce food waste by 50% by the 1st of January 2028, in line with the UN Sustainable Development Goal 12.3. But I'm afraid the evidence is that food waste levels have not decreased overall relative to baselines. Furthermore, since 2018, despite huge efforts from some businesses, there's actually been an increase if waste by producers and manufacturers is included. Including in edible parts, businesses produced 5% more food waste in 2021 compared to baseline, with a 9% increase from producers and manufacturers. So I wonder if the Minister can tell me, does he accept the problem of food waste has actually got worse? Can you tell us, will the 50% reduction target be achieved in 2028? And if not, what further measures does he plan to take? And will he strengthen the Grocery Code Adjudicator's remit with an explicit focus on tackling unfair trading practices which lead to food waste? Will he finally deliver and require food waste to be monitored and reported through the supply chain? Because businesses, as we've heard, are clear about the importance of a level playing field to ensure all supply chain participants use best practice methodology with robust processes to capture and measure their food loss. So does he agree with them that voluntary actions are inadequate and that the continuing failure of many businesses to reduce food waste actually risks undermining the progress which has been achieved voluntarily? Businesses supporting mandatory food waste reporting know that identifying and reporting their waste will enable them to drive down costs and improve their efficiency and productivity. It's not surprising the government's response to the consultation rejecting regulation faced a legal challenge on the ground of irrationality, given all the evidence in their own impact assessment that costs can be recouped with only a small reduction in food waste. So the Secretary of State was right to withdraw his predecessor's consultation response last November, but as we've heard, we still have no decision. Instead, he told RAP to run yet another consultation and said any decision could still be another 6 months away. So can the Minister today tell us whether we are any nearer a mandatory scheme being introduced? Finally, Ms Vaz, on labour shortages, the EFRA Select Committee found clear evidence that food insecurity and food waste have significantly increased with food left in the fields to rot because of lack of labour. It's 10 months since the publication of John Shropshire's independent review into labour shortages in the food supply chain. What is the government's strategy for preventing yet more waste? Where is the response to the Shropshire report, which was promised by the Farming Minister that we would see last autumn? And let me conclude by reiterating that for us it's clear food security is national security. Labour will back our food producers by ensuring we buy, sell, make and grow more of our food here at home, entrenching our reputation as a beacon for quality food, high standards and ethical treatment of animals. We will ensure more of our British-grown and reared produce ends up on people's plates, using the government's purchasing power to back British produce, with 50% of food in our hospitals, army bases and prisons locally grown or certified to higher environmental standards. And we will work with business to design and deliver a proper food waste monitoring programme. Put simply, it's time to end the waste.
Mr Moore.
Thank you, Ms Vaz, and it is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I am grateful to all members who have spoken in this debate. And can I particularly thank my honourable friend for Stoke-on-Trent Central for raising this important issue. I know that over many years, in fact, I think all of the years in which she has been in this place, she has championed challenging the complexities and making sure that we're doing our best as a country to reduce food waste. And can I thank her for her efforts in doing that. Of course, nobody wants to see good food go to waste. It harms the environment and is bad for business. The UK is an international leader on tackling food waste, and we are fully committed to meeting the UN Sustainable Development Goal 12.3 target, which seeks to halve global food waste at consumer and retail levels by 2030. Now, there has been many various themes that have been raised throughout this debate, and I wish to try and respond to all the themes that have been raised by all members which have spoken. And let me start by addressing household food waste, which, in my view, and I think all of us will agree, is the biggest opportunity for us to meet the 2030 target to reduce household waste food waste, because 60% of food that is wasted in the UK is wasted by citizens in their own homes. And that is 4.7 million tonnes of food, which could be eaten, being thrown away every single year. And of course, action needs to be taken across the supply chain and in the home. And we are supportive of consumer awareness campaigns delivered by RAP, including Food Waste Action Week and Love Food, Hate Waste, which helps citizens reduce their food waste. The current focus is moving retailers to sell more loose fruit and vegetables so people can buy what they need, which reduces waste and saves plastic, and hopefully reduces the need for as much packaging that we see within the retail network. I will give way.
I was a councillor 20 years ago responsible for waste, and we had the same issue. 20 years. What has happened in the meantime? 20 years of food waste, 20 years of being aware of household food waste. What has happened in 20 years?
Thank you. And I just want to pick up on some stats that have been presented to me and the department by RAP. And of course, we know that the total level post-farm gate waste has actually dropped from a baseline in 2007 to 2021 by 18.3%, with households wasting 17% less than in 2007. But of course, we recognise that household waste is still too high, and we are doing our utmost to ensure that we can reduce that. And I just want to pick up on one of the points that's been raised by the Honourable Member for Strangford, in that the point that he was making about how we, through the education system, can improve food technology, home economics lessons, so that everyone going through the education system has a better understanding of food technology, ingredients, nutritional values, and of course the quantity of which you need to produce good quality meals. Now, all members have referenced mandatory, the request for mandatory food waste reporting, and we support the Coulthard's delivery of the food waste reduction roadmap, which provides guidance to businesses on identifying and measuring food waste and food surplus. We support the Target Measures Act approach, as it enables food businesses, through measuring their surplus and waste, to drive down levels of food waste. It also shines a light on any surplus that arises and how to deal with it getting to redistributors. We consulted on improving on this involuntary approach, with options including making this a mandatory requirement for large businesses. And all members will be aware that when the Secretary of State took his position in November last year, alongside a new ministerial team, including myself, we were determined to review this from previous decisions that had been made, and we are gathering new evidence on this to be able to make the most informed decision using the latest available data, and we look to make this decision soon. I can also reaffirm that I have met Too Good To Go in my own constituency in Ilkley through a visit that we had at Booth's Supermarket, and I just want to put on record actually what a fantastic organisation they are. I hope that it does get rolled out further in the North East if it's not there yet, but I can certainly confirm that it's in Yorkshire and working its way north. But I did take on board the points that they were making to me as part of their request to see mandatory rollout of reporting, and I can confirm to members that this is being considered by the Secretary of State as we speak. Yes.
I'm sure the Minister's heard from a number of members the enthusiasm for mandatory reporting. Could he explain what is causing the government not to go forward, given that businesses want it to happen?
Well, I think it's right that with a previous Secretary of State having made a decision for a voluntary approach to be taken, it is right that the new team that is considering this are reviewing this alongside various stakeholders, and we, as I have said, aim to make an announcement soon. Dealing with food waste redistribution, the government is strongly supportive of the surplus food redistribution sector because we recognise the environmental and social benefits of making sure good food gets eaten rather than it is wasted. And since 2018, we have provided nearly £13 million in funding to increase capacity of the sector, funding infrastructure such as warehouse facilities, freezer units and temperature control controlled vans, taking great strides in improving the capacity of redistributors to access, transport, process, store and ultimately redistribute surplus to those who need it. The results of our investment and the hard work of all the people involved in the redistribution sector is reflected in the latest report from WRAP, which shows the total amount of food redistributed in the UK in 2022 was over 170,000 tonnes. This has a value of around £590 million and is equivalent to over 404 million meals and is an increase of 133% since 2019. It is good to hear that certain members have raised certain examples of good voluntary schemes that are taking place within their constituencies. And I want to commend the work done by the company Shopping in the honourable members for Washington and Sunderland West constituency, which I think she referenced 6.3 million meals would have been saved that would have otherwise gone to landfill. So it's good to recognise the work that is going on in all of our constituencies. And as well as meeting Too Good to Go, as I've already expressed, I met with Olio literally yesterday to discuss the work that they are doing through the app-based system that they have. So it is a recognition that there is much work that is going on through the private sector and through voluntary-based schemes to reduce food waste. The member for North Devon raised particular issues on farm, as did the member for Stoke-on-Trent Central. In addition to the work on post farm gate surplus, the Prime Minister announced at the NFU conference earlier this year action to tackle surplus food on farms with a £50 million fund to redirect that surplus into the hands of those who need it. We will look to provide further details on this in coming months, and we are working with stakeholders to make sure that we get the scheme adequately working appropriately to make sure that we can have the most positive impact on reducing food waste, and we are interacting with various stakeholders to address this. We seek to a productive and efficient farming sector that prevents waste occurring in the first place, and we are supporting investment in productivity, boosting equipment, technology and infrastructure through the Farming Investment Fund, and this provides grants to farmers and growers that will help their businesses prosper while improving their productivity and enhancing the environment. And of course, WRAP is supportive of the measures that the government is rolling out and recognises that the total amount of edible food on UK farms that might be suitable for redistribution is approximately 330,000 tonnes per annum, and this is approximately 10% of the total of 3.6 million tonnes surplus and waste that they estimate to be generated on farm. And we as a government are bringing out, working with various stakeholders, WRAP included, to address how we can minimise food waste and food redistribution from on-farm. And I just want to pick up the point that has been raised in relation to the supply chain and contracts. I think the honourable member for Tiverton and Honiton raised alongside his colleague. We have taken steps through the Agriculture Act 2020 to clamp down on these kinds of unfair contract practices through the fair dealings powers that have been awarded through that Act. And just last year in December, we launched a review into the fairness in the fresh produce supply chain, and we are currently analysing the responses and will publish soon a summary of those responses, including our proposed next steps. And we intend to work with stakeholders to explore how these powers could be exercised to reduce those concerns and also provide more certainty to farmers that are being negatively impacted as a result of some of the decisions that the supermarkets are making through unfair practices in their contract supply chain. Many members raised the challenges to do with curbside collection of food waste. The food and drink surplus and waste hierarchy lays out clear guidance for the use and disposal of surplus food and waste, and we ask all businesses to take into account the measures that we as a government wish to do, particularly in relation to the food hierarchy, which is, first of all, to prevent food waste, followed by the redistribution of food surplus to those that need it, but ultimately, as a last result, for that to end up as animal feed. There is, of course, tax relief when businesses donate to charity, and there will always be some waste that we cannot be prevented, and that hierarchy states that we will look to get rid of that waste through preferably anaerobic digestion rather than landfill, because it has been recognised of the negative consequences that it can have on the environment if it goes to landfill. But when we're dealing with anaerobic digestion, whatever the preventative and reduction actions that are taken, some food waste will arise, and anaerobic digestion is, of course, the government's preferred option for recycling food that eventually ends up as waste. Treating food waste through anaerobic digestion removes it from the residual waste stream, where, of course, it can end up in landfill and create harmful greenhouse gases. The member for Stoke-on-Trent Central asked the question about how local authorities would roll out a curbside collection for food waste. Under Section 45 of the Environmental Protection Act, as amended by the Environment Act 2021, we will require all local authorities in England to arrange for weekly collection of food waste for recycling. It's frustrating. In my local authority in Bradford, we do not collect food waste, and I think other members have already referenced that, and therefore there is a disparity in what local authorities are doing across England, and the government wants to create clarity that all local authorities must adhere to this. This must always be collected separately from residual waste and dry recyclable materials so that it can be recycled appropriately. And the Act also requires non-household municipal premises such as businesses, hospitals and schools to arrange for food waste recycling collections. In Simpler Recycling, government response, which was published just last October, we announced that these requirements must be implemented by the 31st of March 2025 for non-household municipal premises in England, such as hospitals, schools and businesses, but for curbside collection for domestic properties by the 31st of March 2026, and then for micro businesses by the 31st of March 2027. And DEFRA has brought forward up to £295 million capital funding to roll out weekly food waste collections across England, and the government will also be providing resource funding to be spent from this financial year to support local authorities to implement food waste collections. In concluding, Ms Vaz, the government is committed to preventing and driving down food waste. We are supporting initiatives to increase prevention and to take action to get surplus food into the redistribution system, which of course that is crucially what we need to do to ensure that it does not end up in landfill or anaerobic digestion. And we are helping businesses to be more resilient, efficient and cut costs whilst protecting the environment. We are helping citizens with advice on how they can reduce their food waste and save money. And can I thank all members for their contributions today, particularly my honourable friend, the member for Stoke-on-Trent Central, for bringing forward this important debate.
Thank you, Minister. Joe Gideon, 2 minutes to wind up.
Thank you very much, Ms Vaz. I'd just like to also add my thanks to everybody who's taken part in this debate today. I think all honourable members have shared the idea that we have to do something about food waste. You know, it's not party political, and I think the tone of the debate was very much appropriate with that. And I'd like to thank the Minister, and I look forward with bated breath to the announcement on mandatory reporting. I know he's still gathering evidence, but I think that, yes, hopefully we will get a good outcome on that. As we reflect on the importance of food in our lives, with 11 million people in the UK experiencing food insecurity and charities struggling to help, I think everybody in the debate has agreed that we have to address the scandal of the volume of food waste at all stages in the supply chain. This demands a concerted effort across all sectors, government, industry, farmers and consumers. And what the member for Southampton said resonated so much with me, because I know I buy more than I need to. I still shop as if I've got a family at home, even though they've moved out long since. So we all share the responsibility for doing something on that. By increasing awareness, implementing effective policies, fostering innovation and supporting grassroots efforts, we can transform surplus into sustenance, ensuring that nobody goes hungry, while simultaneously safeguarding our resources and planet for future generations.
The question is that this House has considered food waste and food distribution. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order. Minister.